Okay, so mic problems. Lewis says they can't stop me. Um, and that's his reaction to the Mexico Grand Prix. We'll be telling you who's been working against him. Also, we will be discussing the entire reaction to the Mexico Grand Prix. We'll be looking at George Russell has been outspoken about some interesting clauses in his new contract. And Fernando Alonso wading in on the FIA about the way they handle Turn 1, Lap 1 in Mexico City. This is your daily F1 news, and this is F1 Grandstand. And if you are an F1 fan, then you are in the right place. Please hit a like on the video, hit the bell button so you keep up to date. It makes a huge difference to the success of the channel, and I am truly grateful. But yes, reaction to all of the madness of the Mexico Grand Prix. So as you can see by the thumbnail, we're coming straight in with Lewis Hamilton saying they can't stop me. But who are they, right? That's the real question. Who is Lewis Hamilton referring to? And we can speculate, ruminate on that, but let's go to the article. Please get in the chat, say hello if you are with us tonight. Hey Gemma, nice to have you with us. Thank you for pointing out there was no sound. Again, I forgot to turn my mic on. So first 30 seconds was just me chatting away. But there you go. Hey DT. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, we've got a lot to get into tonight, guys. Hey, Kyle. Welcome. So, Lewis Hamilton, they can't stop me. Where is this story coming from? Well, it's coming from motorsport.com. And I think he's got a point. So, obviously, let's get into how all this has come about. So, Lewis Hamilton was obviously fuming about the 10-second penalty he received in the Mexico Grand Prix. Bearing in mind, lots of other cars went off track, rejoined track, and seemed to gain an advantage, but were not penalised. So Lewis Hamilton basically called his 10-second Mexico Grand Prix penalty for cutting turn 4 nuts, as he questioned the stewards after it dropped him to P8. So this is what he had to say. I had a great start and we were breaking into turn 1. I was in turn 2. I navigated through 1, 2 and 3 and then didn't go off track. Others cut those turns and held position and didn't get penalties. It's nuts, he said. And then he was asked if the penalty had been explained to him, and he continued, it's kind of pretty much the same as all the other people around me. So he did, however, enjoy his fight with Red Bull's Max Verstappen. That, it felt like racing. I was fine there when he was racing Max. It was just him cutting, and then I'm the only one to get a 10-second penalty. What he's talking about is Max did cut. He went right across the grass. Did give back, I think, 2 places. But on that in turn 1, Hamilton was actually in track position. He'd just taken track position from Charles Leclerc to move into P2. Leclerc and Verstappen end up going off track over the grass and rejoining the race circuit. Hamilton back in P3, Hamilton and Verstappen into P4. So Hamilton did actually lose a place there. The stewards ruled that Hamilton gained a lasting advantage after locking up at turn 4 and cutting the corner over the grass. He rejoined the track ahead of Verstappen without reducing his lead. For this reason, he was given a 10-second penalty. So what Hamilton said, well, what took place at turn 4, he pinched the front and went to go down the exit road, which he did. But obviously the exit road is the dustiest place on earth. He then pinched the other car down, so he ended up on the grass, but it was basically next to the exit road. And so he did say there were still some positives, but this is where it gets intriguing, and this is where the tinfoil hats come out. This is what Hamilton said. I really don't know what to expect moving forward, but I'll keep trying. I'll get up tomorrow, train. I'm trying to prepare. And then he says this, I can't let those that aren't necessarily being helpful stop me from moving forward. Who are those people? That's the question. Like, who are those people? Can't stop him because he ain't got no brakes. That is so true. That is so true, Kyle. But yeah, he was. So Max didn't gain 2 seconds when he cut through the grass. Max gained, but Max did retain track position though, didn't he? I know Lewis gained, from a timing point of view, 2 seconds from that move. Now, if he had slowed down and gained less, and Max was just on his gearbox rather than gaining those 2 seconds, would he have got that penalty? And it leads us nicely on to someone with no skin in the game, really. So this is what Fernando Alonso had to say about that lap 1, turn 1, because it all feeds into this. So Fernando Alonso said, "I don't understand how 3 drivers can cut the first corner and just continue in the position that they entered." This is what he said to Sky Sports. "It's like allowing you to risk everything, but you have this get out of jail free card if you get it wrong." You know, we've seen it almost every year when we've been in Mexico City. It was Carlos Sainz last year, Charles the year before, Lewis 10 years ago. It's basically lawnmower racing. Something needs to change in Mexico because, as I said, if you can just send it down the outside, and if you can either make it stick, or if you can't, you can just cut the grass and return in the position you were in before, then that is not how it should be. So he is basically a scathing review of how the FIA dealt with that lap 1, turn 1. And that's the thing, because the FIA and stewards often ignore shenanigans, if you want to call it, in racing incidents in lap 1, turn 1, right? But you can't argue with Fernando there, I don't think. Fernando is right in what he's saying, because it's not just this year. It's every year in Mexico City. There's a precedent that's been set that if you gun it down the outside, and if you can somehow make it stick, great. But if you can't, you've got literally a direct line back onto the track by going over the grass and retain track position without any penalty. That should not be acceptable. And Lewis Hamilton's penalty, because it wasn't lap 1 when he had that wheel-to-wheel move with Verstappen, he gets a 10-second penalty, and he is the only driver to receive a penalty for that, for going out off-track limits and rejoining the racetrack. Only Hamilton, So I think, so Kyle says you only get a penalty for gaining positions. You get a warning for exceeding track limits. But this is where it gets a grey area, Kyle. This is kind of the point. So you're right. You exceed track limits 4 times, you'll get a penalty. But this wasn't really exceeding track limits. This was gaining or holding a position which would have been lost, wouldn't it? It would have been lost. That even holding a position when you've gunned it down the outside and cut across a track is still not where you would be if you had followed the racetrack and kept it on the tarmac, because obviously you are going too quick, which means you had to slow down, which means you may have lost position to the drivers if you were keeping it on the tarmac. So it becomes this grey area of how do you legislate for that. And definitely Leclerc absolutely did gain a track position. If you look at the replay, Hamilton had his front wheels, he had got the apex of the corner ahead of Leclerc, and that was his position, really. He had basically took position 2, and Leclerc rejoined in front of Hamilton and retook P2 off Hamilton, and he's in P3. Now, it's only Ferrari would have absolutely objected to that if it wasn't Charles Leclerc, if it wasn't their driver who had taken P2 under those circumstances from leaving the track and then regaining the track. Ferrari absolutely would have objected if it was any other team other than other than their own driver, Charles Leclerc. So it really is like an interesting point that, and then you've got obviously drivers like Fernando Alonso watching all this unfold in front of him, going, "This is just not fair." And George Russell George Russell was obviously moaning about it as well, because what he was saying is, well, then Max, even though he did yield, and come back on into P4, and he did yield to Hamilton. George was saying, yeah, but if he hadn't exceeded track limits and slowed down to actually make the car stick on the circuit, George would have gone past him as well. So George thinks that that was completely unfair. So I understand why all these drivers are complaining about it, especially when it happened pretty much most races in Mexico City over the last 10 years. So I do understand why everyone is sort of up in arms about it. And if they're going to go back to Mexico City next year, why this has to change. And the solution is quite clear what they need to do. Where the grass is, they need to gravel it, right? If there are gravel traps, no one is exceeding track limits, are they? It's the fact that it's grass and people can, use this grey area and they can risk it for a biscuit, which is what it is. They're literally risking it for a biscuit, thinking, oh, we'll get away with it. And like Fernando says, they're gunning it down the outside, and they can risk it for a biscuit because if they don't, they can go across the grass, no damage to the car, rejoin the track, and especially if they're allowed to retain their position, so they're not really having to defend the driver from the driver behind. So yeah, it's a talking point that'll go on and on and on. This Kyle says, how much time did Hamilton gain in Singapore when he had no brakes and Alonso couldn't catch him? Hamilton only got penalised for the number of times he exceeded. Exactly, he got penalised for exceeding track limits, right? But he lost, because he lost his brakes. He lost 60 seconds to Fernando Alonso, and I think in 4 laps. So Kyle thinks the stewards were fair. It's such a hard situation to actually manage. Was it a 10-second penalty Hamilton should have got? Should he got? And it was a 10-second stop and go. I mean, would a 5-second penalty be more accurate? I don't know. And do you think that those cars who retained, okay, they didn't gain positions, but to retain their position from basically cutting across the grass, do we think that's actually fair? And if there isn't legislation that really covers that situation, should there be? Or should it just be down to a steward's interpretation of it? I don't know. They're obviously the drivers are unhappy about it. And I think if I was Lewis Hamilton, I'd be the most unhappy about it, because not only did he lose a position to Leclerc on the first lap because Leclerc took advantage of the grass. So yeah, I don't know. You're right. He gained 2 seconds of track time, exactly. So a 5-second penalty would only have been 3 seconds on track. Well, that's true, but would that be enough? Do you know what I mean? Would that actually be enough when you look at the incident? I don't know. I don't know. It's one of those. I don't see what else Hamilton could have done. I mean, should he have allowed Max Verstappen instead of taking advantage of a 2-second penalty? Should he have allowed Max Verstappen to become like sort of wheel to wheel, so there was no time advantage, and they were literally racing again? Would they have imposed a penalty at that point? Because if that's the case, should Hamilton's team have said, look, slow down, let Max get on your gearbox and start racing again? I mean, I don't know. I think it's I think this is a 50-50. I think people are going to have an opinion on it, and I honestly don't know what the answer is. I just know that Hamilton is feeling like there are some forces against him here, and I think he would have been less bothered if other drivers, especially in lap 1, turn 1, when 3 cars did. And also we should also consider, when we talk about exceeding track limits, shouldn't there be some sliding scale of, well, how much of the track limit you've exceeded, right? Because all four wheels over the line is exceeding track limits. Do that 4 times as a penalty. But if you then go cross country and you've because what we're talking about, some people exceed track limits for 0.1 of a second. Yet someone else can exceed track limits for 10 times that amount of time to be exceeding track limits, right? Should that be a factor within the rules that of how what a penalty looks like? Because if you've exceeded track limits once, but you've done it by a second of being outside track limits, should that deserve a penalty rather than exceeding track limits 4 times and getting a 5-second penalty when you've only exceeded track limits for a 0.1, a hundredth of a second, right? Should that be part of it? Because there is nothing to legislate for how long a car is outside of the track limits. And I think that might be a way of legislating for those situations when people literally go cross country straight across the grass, right? Because they've exceeded track limits for a longer period of time. And should that mean that even if they do that once, that would incur a penalty? Maybe it should. But these are the conversation points I think people should be talking about, because the drivers don't like it, right? The drivers don't like it. So yeah, I mean, so there are ways to sort of consider how to address exceeding track limits and advantages. That's what I think. I know Kyle's with the stewards. Kyle is definitely with the stewards on this one. Kyle says Hamilton couldn't give it back. Behrman had passed Max. That's true. That is absolutely true. Behrman put that brilliant move wheel to wheel on Max by the time Lewis was back on track. So a penalty is the only option, as in he couldn't yield to. He obviously couldn't yield to Ollie Behrman. So yeah, it's an interesting one to manage, but the real question is whether. Yeah, I honestly don't know how that situation could go any different. But I don't think Hamilton would be upset about the penalty if other drivers who he feels gained an advantage for exceeding track limits had also had penalties. I think that's what it comes down to. I think Hamilton feels like it's the unfairness of it when other drivers definitely gained an advantage. How you quantify that advantage. If the only way we quantify an advantage is by you gained a position, i.e. you overtook somebody, if we can't quantify an advantage by retaining your position, which you really would not have retained if you had slowed down and kept it on the tarmac, you see what I'm saying? It's how to quantify an advantage. Right? And if you can't quantify an advantage, if we're saying that retaining your position isn't an advantage, well, okay, maybe what we should be quantifying is you exceeded track limits for a certain amount of time. Well, just for doing that, there should be a penalty because you were off track for a second, where most people exceed track limits for a hundredth of a second. Right? What do you think? I mean, that would make sense to me as an option, because they have to do something. It can't just be the definition of advantage is if you gain a place. Because there are other, obviously, as seen in Mexico City, other advantages by lawn mowing across the track, right? This one's going to go on and on. This one will go on and on. So I'm going to move it on. I want to hear, if you're watching on on live replay, please tell me your opinions on some of our ideas and get in the chat and tell me what you think. But that's literally what was going on with all of the nonsense in Baku. It all came down to quantifying advantages, track limits, appropriate penalties. And Lewis is obviously said that he was the only one to actually get a penalty for those offences. But I'm going to move it on to George Russell. I'm going to move on to the George Russell news. Okay, so George Russell let it slip today in an interview about his contract. Because we've been talking about the George Russell contract for a long time. We all know he got good money, right? 25 plus bonuses for a year. And he got a +1 deal. He wanted a longer deal. We know that. We wanted a 2-year deal. And he wanted performance related clauses, which would allow him to automatically extend. So the decision would be down to his performance rather than Mercedes saying, well, yeah, we'll keep you or we won't. And he did say this. He said, it is something I haven't actually said publicly, but the deal is if I'm performing next year, we have a specific clause that if I reach a target, we will automatically renew for 2027. So my seat for 2027 is in my hands. And I like that because Russell's obviously agreed to a term where he thinks, I know I'm going to be competitive next year. He knows he's a good driver. He's a top 3, top 4 driver without a shadow of a doubt. So he has got that. We were talking about Kimi Antonelli as his benchmark. If I perform this much better than Kimi, then I will keep my seat. I told you this in a show when I announced George Russell's contract. It's not exactly true. There are metrics from his performance overall, and it's a straight target. And I think if he wins the World Championship for one, maybe if he gets second or a certain amount of points or a certain amount of wins, if he achieves all of those things or any of those things, we don't know exactly what it is, he will automatically renew his deal for 2027. So what does that mean for Kimi Antonelli? Kimi Antonelli doesn't have those performance clauses in his contract. So it means if Mercedes are going to go all out and sign Max Verstappen in 27, and it would be a George Russell, Max Verstappen combo. That's what it would be if George has satisfied that performance clause. And I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't see, if it came to it, I don't see anything wrong with that. Why not have two of 3 best drivers on the grid at Mercedes? How could you be unhappy with that? Kimi Antonelli is managed by Toto Wolff, and he would definitely get another drive. He's a great driver. He would definitely get another drive in 27. So the other thing he said, he said, so I'm not being strung along here. We're not going to be in the same position as we were 6 months ago. If I perform, and I don't want to go into details, but if I perform 100%, I'll be staying. And this is what else he said. He said, everything works out for the best. I actually wanted to sign the deal back in October 2024, but the deal I got today is substantially better than what I would have got had I signed it then. So yeah, sometimes I think you just have to trust in your ability, and I feel I'm only getting stronger. And that, my friends, is a little dig at Toto Wolff, right? That is a little dig at Toto Wolff saying, haha, right? My win in Singapore has made it, and my reluctance to agree to your initial offer of 10 plus bonuses, and now you have to give me 25 plus bonuses for next year. It was a little dig to say, yeah, it worked out as it should for me, and my future is in my hands. So George Russell with a little punch in Toto's ribs for that negotiation, and I thought that was quite interesting because we've been talking about it. That's what we thought was going to happen. Hey, so we got Danny O in the chat. Welcome to the chat, my friend. You are very welcome to the F1 Grandstand community. And he says, how the hell Verstappen wasn't penalised? We have been talking about this a lot. But like Kyle says, Max gave back the position to Charles and he never gained a large margin on the other times. And this has been the discussion point, Daniel, because my point is, how do we quantify advantage? The only way advantage is getting quantified is, did you gain a position? But that's not the way to quantify advantage, is it? Because if you do, if you're like Charles Leclerc that manages to retain your position from going off piste for multiple tenths of seconds, right, out exceeding track limits, and then regain track position, that you could argue is an advantage, because you wouldn't have retained that position if you had took the corner at a slower speed retained, and battled it out, and people behind you which are challenging for the gaps, you'd probably, if you overcut the corner and lock up, you're more likely to lose 2 positions in the first corner than you are to retain your position. And this comes down to what Fernando Alonso was saying. There is now a method in Mexico City to gun it down the outside, risk it for a biscuit. Can I make it hold? It doesn't matter if you can't, because you go straight across the grass. You're going to rejoin in your original position without penalty. But that is still an advantage. And that is the point that I think the drivers are basically saying. How do you quantify advantage, and how do you penalise effectively for rule breaks, which might be exceeding track limits, which we know you have to do it 4 times before any penalty is going to be awarded. But we need to introduce, in my opinion, a time how long you have exceeded track limits for. If we introduce that, well then, yeah, if you're out of track limits for 100th of a second, you do that 4 times, well, you're out of track limits. But if you're out of track limits for, 3/10 to cut across the grass, well, you've literally exceeded track limits 30 times more than you would have done if you did it 3 times for smaller moments. And I think that needs to be considered. And I think I've solved it. And I think the FIA should be watching F1 Grandstand and go, do you know what? Tony has solved the problem. Time outside of track limits should be a factor when awarding penalties. Right? That's what I think it should be. I think I've literally solved the problem. My God, get in touch. You can have that one for free. Time outside of exceeding track limits should be a factor in penalties. Not all exceeding track limits are the same. Not all advantages gained are the same. So let's go. Verstappen does it all the time and gets away with it. Well, Verstappen does a lot of things that he seems to get away with, but he does also get penalised. I just think Verstappen pushes his luck. And I think if you're the best driver in the world, which he is, then that edge you look for, you are always looking for that edge. And I think that's the other thing Fernando Alonso was alluding to. If you are the wily old fox, a seasoned, the best driver on the grid that realises there's an edge or a loophole or an opportunity you can possibly exploit at certain tracks, because even by the way they are being by the stewardship, right, how they're being sort of controlled by the FIA, well then you're gonna play for that advantage. And the thing about Mexico City is they can solve it by removing the grass and putting gravel traps down. That is the solution. You need to use gravel. It was the same in Austin as well. It was one of the big problems in Austin, Texas, exceeding track limits because there's all these big tarmac runoff areas. Gravel is the answer, right? Gravel's the answer. Gravel traps. I don't know why all tracks, especially going into any like turn ones, haven't just removed the grass and filled it with gravel. Cars will not be going cross country when the gravel trap's there. Cars will respect, the tarmac if literally gravel is the track limit. And DT, I completely agree. If you're not pushing your luck, you're not racing. I agree. Every top driver is looking for an edge. Of course they are. You cannot be one of the best drivers in the world without pushing for the edge all the time. These cars, it was interesting, wasn't it? There was less than 4/10, between like in qualifying between second and I think ninth. It was crazy close. And that's where we're going. Next year it'll be different. And I agree, Kyle. And you know what? Bring back horsepower. Let them race. Let them race. Let them race. And you know what, Kyle? I've already told you about this, but this is good news. If you're prepared to wait for 2031, the consensus from all the teams, according to Toto Wolff, is the sweet spot for Formula One is V8s. So we're going to get away from this electrification nonsense. We have to run the cycle, obviously, from 26 to 31. Boo, boo, boo. But we have to do it. That 50% electrification. No one wants it, but we've got to do it. But the sweet spot for Formula One, according to Toto Wolff and other team bosses that have had these conversations, is V8s naturally aspirated with sustainable fuels. We get the noise back. We get the simplicity of those engines. So we'll get new engine manufacturers back to the game. And we get racing back to horsepower, back to mechanical grip. I mean, next year we've got mechanical grip, to be fair. We've lost the Venturi tunnels. We've lost the ground effect era. There is some active aero, front wing, back wing, but we are going back to mechanical grip. But by 2031, we may get somewhere more representative of Formula One that we know and love and that the fans will appreciate. So that is where we're heading to. And there was an offer, by the way. This really annoys me. There was an offer by the FIA to do this within 3 years, because even the FIA have realised this 50% electrification is not what the fans want. So they said, well, what about if we go to V8s in 3 years? But unfortunately, Mercedes, Ferrari, because they're supplying literally 40% of the teams on the grid with engines, have said, well, we've put so much money into this new electrification and power units. We can't afford to do that in 3 years' time. It has to be the full 5-year cycle. Very, very annoying. And Kyle's right. Hamilton's problem is that he doesn't have Toto's influence debating his case with the stewards anymore. Toto and Horner are great advocates to have on your team. Yeah, they are. Those types of team principles, Toto Wolff and Christian Horner, you know they are going into bat for you. Like, they are not like soft men, are they? You know, they are warriors. They want to win as much as the drivers want to win, if not more so. And they will fight for their driver like a dog with a bone. No pun intended, Toto. But yeah, that's basically what's going to happen in 2031. But it does seem like such a long time away, unfortunately, for the roar of the V8s. I mean, my sweet spot was a V10, obviously, but there you go. And yeah, Kyle, you're right. Next year we'll be great until the batteries die out. But that's the other thing, that Red Bull's influence on the 50% electrification and 50% internal combustion engine. Red Bull lobbied the FIA to say, hang on a minute, we need a bit of variance chucked in there, because under their tests, they were running out of battery horsepower, battery kilowatt power at the end of long straights. So the cars were slowing down, right? So what they said with their Red Bull power unit and Ford power unit, from all the simulations they're doing, they're going, hang on a minute, this isn't going to work. So they lobbied the FIA for a 5 to 10% variance in that 50-50 split. Meaning, should they run out of kilowatt power hours at the end of the straight, the internal combustion engine can compensate by up to 5%. And the FIA have gone, all right, we'll give you a 5% variance. And Toto Wolff has gone, hang on a minute, we don't want you to have that, because they've got their engines obviously working very well. Mercedes, when they come in with a new power unit, when they did it in 2014, they were dominant for 7 years. They're going to come with a good power unit. There's no doubt about it. So obviously Toto Wolff pushing back on that. Yeah, Toto has the best sound bites on Drive to Survive when he's losing. Yeah. Wow, it reminds me of, he sounds like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Wow, get in the car, George. I'm not saying that sounds like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but you know what I mean. Danny O says he didn't do it in 2021. We all know what happened, right? Yeah, well, 2021, Toto, I tell you what, though, he didn't win his argument in Toto in 2021. But if you don't think that he went in fighting, you're joking, aren't you? I think Toto Wolff probably had to be held back from punching someone in the face. I'm not joking. That in the 2021 debacle with Lewis Hamilton losing his world championship, I guarantee that Toto would have been like a rabid dog. It didn't go his way, obviously. It didn't work out how they wanted it to, but I bet he was in there swinging and swinging and swinging. 100%. But no, you're right. It didn't end how we would have expected it to end. And by the way, if you're watching this stream, please do smash a like on the video. It makes a massive difference to the success of the channel. I forgot to ask you earlier on. Please do that for me. That'll be very much appreciated. Yeah, thanks for that. And if you haven't hit the bell, by the way, it's in the corner of your YouTube screen. Hit the bell, and that way you always get up to date when we're going live and new videos. So please do that. Very much appreciated. But yeah, Toto Wolff, Christian Horner, Ron Dennis, Flavio Briatore, Frank Williams, back to Colin Chapman. Any of them. Those men, yeah, fierce. Yeah, absolutely fierce. I'm sure of it. Absolutely fierce. Danio says that Toto. You're saying Toto didn't lose it? I think he did. I think he absolutely went ballistic. Toto Wolff, we've got a man in the paddock. We call him Tubby George. That gives us an awful lot of information, and I can tell you, 2021, Toto Wolff went freaking ballistic. He did. Publicly, he's the face of a $3 billion racing team, but I can tell you, Toto Wolff went freaking ballistic. Hey up, Crackite. Jeez, you're a bit late, son. You've missed all of our chat. We've talked about the debacle at Mexico City, the drama. Should people have been... You need to go and re-watch this one. It's a good one. We've been lots of debate. And and not just debate, we think we've even solved the FIA's problem about exceeding track limits and retaining position, and maybe how we could... penalize those people effectively, and also how to quantify a benefit that's gained from going exceeding track limits. We've done a lot tonight, to be honest, Crackeye. But I think if you rewatch it, you'll like it. Get involved in the chat. I will answer you in the chat as well. So yeah, we've had Kyle says world peace is achieved. That's what we do at F1 Grandstand, Kyle. We're literally solving the world's problems, including Formula One step at a time. Tonight's been dead good though. Oh, I'm not forgetting this though. I need to announce driver of the weekend. So, do you remember in the preview show who I said it would be? Driver of the weekend, this man, Oliver Bearman. A brilliant P4, Mexico City. What a class act. And I loved his wheel-to-wheel racing with Max Verstappen. It was fantastic. He smelt blood in the water. Wheel-to-wheel with Max Verstappen. It was so good. So good. So, Ollie Bearman, driver of the weekend. I predicted him. Well done to me. Well done to me. I never said Gasly. That wasn't me. I said Ollie Bearman was going to be driver of the weekend. But I also said who would be my dipstick of the weekend. Now, I said it was going to be Franco Colapinto. Now, we know Franco Colapinto didn't do very well, right? I think he finished P19. But he wasn't my dipstick of the day. I've awarded dipstick of the weekend to, this might surprise you, George Russell for his team radio in the race. It was so hard to choose a dipstick of the weekend, right? But I had to give dipstick of the weekend. I had to find some reason, a genuine reason. And the reason why George Russell gets dipstick of the weekend was because of his team radio when he was throwing his teddy out the cot to go past Kimi and to let past Kimi Antonelli to have a crack at Ollie Bearman. And he said, if you're not going to let me pass now, don't bother letting me pass at all. And it was just, prefect, hall monitor, yeah, George Russell. It was very much George Russell. So do you agree with me? Get in the chat and tell me, do you agree that for that reason alone that George Russell should have been awarded dipstick of the weekend? Don't leave me hanging. Please tell me you agree. Gemma says he was on his period. I need a thumbs up if you agree with me on this one. It was a hard one to pick. I know Gemma was saying Yuki Tsunoda, but listen, Gemma, you picked Yuki Tsunoda for dipstick of the weekend, but honestly, honestly, Yuki got thrown under the bus this weekend. They wouldn't let him pit. they wouldn't let him pit to try and create a time gap for Max Verstappen. So they literally threw Yuki under the bus, didn't let him come into the pits to put on a fresh set of tyres. And his car is, the grip is gone, tyres are gone. And it's like, no, Yuki, you stay where you are and to try and hold everybody up. So they did throw Yuki under the bus. So, Gemma, Yuki's not getting dipstick of the weekend. It is George Russell. Crackite says Russell was on one on Sunday. Yeah, he was. It was funny, right? While Toto was away, Russell had a play. Yeah, Kyle says George Radio is great. He's got his contract. He can now shout out now. I know he's just got his contract, right? He's won really in that contract negotiation with Toto Wolff. Got an extra 10 million a year. Got his performance clauses that he wanted, and now he's saying to, if Kimi doesn't let me, either tell him to move now or don't tell him at all. It's like a parent talking to a kid. Do it now or don't bother. It was brilliant. So yeah, so George Russell, I hope you're in agreement. He has to get dipstick of the weekend just purely for his radio chat, which was brilliant and very entertaining. Yeah, so that pretty much wraps up our reaction to Mexico Grand Prix. It was a fun one. And thank you everyone who joined me for the watch-alongs as well. We made it fun. We know FP was always boring, but we all made it fun together. I really, really appreciate all of you. It was so much fun. Thanks to everyone who's been in the chat. Welcome to our new members of the community, to Danio. Crackite's back on the scene. Love it. Thanks for joining in, Kyle, DT, Gemma, all the usual faces. You made it really good fun. Hopefully you agree with our decisions, which were drive of the weekend, dipstick of the weekend. I will be back same time tomorrow night, 7:30, with your latest F1 news. Do look out for some breaking F1 news tomorrow. Don't forget to smash like on the video. Don't forget to hit the bell. Makes a huge difference to the channel. Thank you so much to each and every one of you. Do have a very pleasant evening. And I will see you all tomorrow. Ta-ta.